Hi, I'm Christian Garnett, content producer at the Cape Media Center, and this is what's happening. Today, I am with Joe Yukna, the co-founder of the Cape Cod Military Museum. Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Good, Christian. How are you?
Doing good as well. So today on this episode of What's Happening, I'd like to talk to you about the Cape Cod Military Museum as a whole, as well as your current efforts in fundraising to turn a Vietnam-era landing craft into a memorial for the amphibious training that happened on Cape Cod.
Let me give you a brief history of how we got started.
Go ahead.
I was a Department of Defense police officer last century on Camp Edwards Otis, and as I drove around, there's thousands of these World War II buildings, a lot of them in a sagging state of disrepair. So I became interested in what occurred militarily on the Cape. When I was a kid, Otis was an Air Force base, a SAC base. And so I knew about Otis, but I didn't really know much about Camp Edwards. I put out a call to get volunteers to help get a military museum going. Mr. Jerry Ellis responded to that. And so Jerry and I became the co-founders of the Cape Cod Military Museum. We had worked out a deal with General Carter on the base to have War II barracks and 6 acres around them as the site for the military museum, because Camp Edwards was an open base at the time. Obviously, this was September of 2001. All that changed with the attacks on the towers.
Right.
We couldn't have a museum where no one could visit. So we've been knocked back a few pegs. We've had some dribs and drabs trying to get it going. We're now trying to get a landlord that has open buildings because of the COVID change in brick and mortar, empty buildings because of Amazon, et cetera, online shopping. So we can get the museum going to raise funds to build our own building eventually down the road. But one of the big things we like to talk about that people are very unaware of is the amount of training that went on here in World War II.
Yeah, I wasn't really aware of that until you told me about it. So would you like to tell me more about that now?
Sure. One of the biggest things was the amphibious engineers trained, and their headquarters was on Washburn Island in Falmouth. And people would know that because after the war, all the buildings were razed and the island was returned to its natural state. There was Camp Canduit in Katuitt, which was an amphibious training center. And that again was raised actually by German POWs that we had on the base, returned that area to its natural state. Camp had done it, reverted to the Crosby Boatyard. So there were 3 major amphibious training centers on the Cape. There were 550 boats in McCoy Bay, 550 boats in Katuitt Bay, and a lot of amphibious techniques. The amphibious engineers landed in North Africa, Italy, Sicily, hundreds of landings in the Pacific. So there was quite a bit of men that started their training here and were involved in landings all over the world. Yeah. Now, what people don't realize is training is very dangerous. There were multiple men killed by misfires with weapons. They were trained in demolition, so there was men killed in explosives and fires. And of course, since they were amphibious engineers, men also drowned. And there's we wanted to memorialize the effort and strain and sweat and blood of the men that were here and the training that occurred here. Some of the major units that people will be familiar with is the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red 1, did training on Cape Cod prior to our involvement in World War II. And of course, they also landed on D-Day. It's kind of funny, we have a photograph of them landing on Old Silver Beach on June 6, 1943. I'm sorry, 1941. And then 3 years later, 1944, on the same exact day, they were landing on Normandy. So
yeah.
For that effort, we acquired a landing craft, a Vietnam era one, which is a fiberglass model that looks almost identical. It has a rounded stern, whereas the World War II wooden ones have an more angled stern, but they really look identical. They're the exact same size. And this obviously, because it's fiberglass, will stand up much better to age. Almost all of the wooden World War II landing craft have rotted away and all that. So what we need to do is find a location for the memorial, build a cradle for it, raise funds to do all this, and build a shelter that's open-sided so people can see it, but keeps the weather out of the craft itself. So that's our goal right now, is to raise. I do lecture series to let people know about the training, but we definitely need help with fundraising. We need grant writers. We need more volunteers. And then that's just one of the stories that we can tell on Cape Cod.
Speaking of that, if somebody wants to donate, how would they do that?
Well, we have our bank accounts with Cape Cod 5-cent savings. So the easy, if you go into a Cape Cod 5-cent savings and make a check or do a cash donation to the Cape Cod Military Museum, they can take it there. We also have a donation button on our website, capecodmilitarymuseum.org.
Got it.
If you sign up for my newsletters, we have donation buttons in that as well.
So, I mean, I know this, but I think the audience should. So, as you said, you already purchased the Higgins boat, right?
Well, Higgins was a company, and they were built at many different sites, and this was built in 1968. So I don't know if it was built. It was built by it was built in Texas.
Okay, but you already have the amphibious vehicle, but you're currently raising funds for a place to house it and use it as the memorial, actually show it to the public, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
We have it, but we have to pay the person who purchased it back for it. And
that is all.
And we got to cover the cost it takes to move it and to set up the cradle that it's going to sit in and the shelter around it. I think it'd be a great tourist draw for people.
I agree.
And it'd be a great way to inform the public of the military history that happened on Cape Cod. Because the amphibious training is just one aspect of the military stories that we have on the Cape. Otis was a major SAC base in World War II. People don't realize it, but the Buzzards Bay and Cape Cod Bay were both sealed off with anti-submarine nets to keep the U-boats at bay.
I didn't know that.
Convoys filled up here. We had, unfortunately, 80 years ago last month, in July, we had a ship run aground in the canal and blocked it off. And so one of the convoys that had formed up in Buzzards Bay had to exit Buzzards Bay and go around the Cape to get to Nova Scotia, where they're going to form a larger convoy to head to England. And because the canal was blocked by this collier that sank, one of the boats in that convoy was torpedoed by a U-boat right off the coast of Cape Cod. So it was a major site that way. The Anti-Aircraft Training Command was located at Camp Edwards. 42 anti-aircraft battalions were trained here. There was a submarine repair base in Provincetown. Who knew? We had 5,000 German POWs that were available to work for Cape Cod businesses. You can rent them out of the base. Joe Louis did a boxing exhibition on the base. General Patton came and gave a speech here. So it really, there's so many. George Bush crashed his plane in Hyannis Airport when he was doing training as an 18-year-old. He was the youngest pilot in naval history. Again, there's all these stories that people have no idea about. We keep finding out new ones as we do more research. Woods Hole was very, very, very important to us winning Woods World War II. One of the big inventions was anti-fouling paint. If you didn't have anti-fouling paint, every battleship, every destroyer would have algae and barnacles on it, slowing it down, making it burn more fuel, having to go into dry dock and have everything chipped off of it. But they found out they could put certain metals and chemicals in the paint so that the ships would not foul. So literally saving billions of gallons of fuel and billions of man hours cleaning those ships. And that's something, literally you don't think about. The seasick pill, because one of the problems they have using the Higgins boats and landing in rough seas was the troops were so seasick they were combat ineffective. You know,
Yeah.
if you haven't been seasick, you might want to get shot at that moment, you know? And
Yeah.
they'd land and the guys would just fall out in the sea and puking. And so they developed the seasick pill by doctors at Camp Edwards. And Camp Edwards had the biggest rehab hospital in World War II. Camp Edwards had 5,000 soldiers in beds at the end of World War II, rehabbing them. And one of the interesting things at the end of Washburn Island's active life, it was a recreation center for these wounded veterans. They used to bus 800 guys over in the morning, then bus another 800 in the afternoon to swim and play. And that was, I think, really good for the soldiers who were hurt, because if you're the only guy with missing a leg on a beach, you're going to feel strange. If everybody on the beach is missing an arm or a leg or burned or whatever, you could relax and have the camaraderie and you know, either somebody else is learning how to swim with one leg, you know. So
Yeah.
it really, there's so much that needs to be told. I think it'd be very interesting. The Military Museum will be a very interesting place for visitors. We need more rainy day activities.
I agree.
You know,
I wasn't originally going to ask this, but if somebody wants to learn more about Cape Cod's military history, how would they do that?
well, if you go to our Facebook page, Cape Cod Military History, on Facebook, we do a monthly newsletter, plus there's daily posts. We're doing a post 80 years ago, what happened 80 years exactly, because obviously 1942 was a pivotal year in World War II, and the newsletter is there, and so that would get them a good insight. There is not a book, although it would be a good one, on the military history that covers all the aspects of what happened on the Cape.
Maybe you should be the one to compile that information.
I actually have a working title, Sword Arm of Sand, but I need a lot more time to do able to do research on it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've given me a ton of information here. But is there anything else you'd like to add before this interview ends?
Well, I'd like to, hope we're trying to get a grant. Dave Vieira has been in contact with the state rep, Dave Vieira, trying to get some money to help us out. But we definitely would like to get the public involved. We definitely need more volunteers. There's such a story to tell. Again, the Facebook page will let you know where I'm doing lectures. If you want to meet with me personally, I got lectures coming up. And we're also, if you have a group that you want a speaker for, in the newsletter, there is a menu of talks that I do, and certainly willing to go anywhere and talk to anybody to raise awareness funds for this very worthy cause.
All right. Thank you, Joe, so much for joining me on this episode of What's Happening. Again, I'm looking forward to seeing the end result here. It's going to happen. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
And once again, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of What's Happening.